They called it a diplomatic mission. Then the human fleet arrived like screaming metal death. The Zephyrian ships had traveled 18 parsecs to get here, flying their lean bioships through the emptiness with the elegant economy that was the hallmark of their race's mastery of the stars. Ambassador Kethfer gazed out the observation deck on the flagship Harmonious, tied as the odd metallic agglomeration that was the human colony of New Meridian grew larger against the starfield. The colony swayed, suspended in space like a cluster of geometric growths, all brutal angles and clangorous industry which offended his visual sensibilities. This aggressive architecture, his aide, Velanara, whispered, her silver flesh shifting with markings of distress. Do you suppose they design everything to be so menacing? The bioluminescent spots on Kethfer's body flashed in a cadence that was a sign of diplomatic finesse. We can't judge them with our standards. They're young, the humans. Maybe given time, they'll discover the elegance of organic shape. The Zephyrian Collective had been watching humanity's expansion into space for nearly 30 standard cycles now, ever since their crude chemical rockets first brought them beyond their home system. The humans had surprised everyone with their rapid adaptation to space travel, though their methods remained shockingly primitive. Where other species had developed elegant biotechnology or refined energy manipulation, humans seemed determined to solve every problem by strapping more metal together and setting it on fire. However, they had created 17 colonies across, for systems within a shorter time frame than the majority of species took developing their original starship design. The Collective Council had concluded it was time for formal contact. Incoming transmission from the human colony, the ship's living interface declared, its tone like wind chimes on a soft breeze. The holographic screen sprang into glittering existence before him, and a human face materialized which Kethfer found most disconcertingly asymmetrical. The being had white skin stretched tight across skeletal facial framework, beady eyes moving recurrently, and a terrible lump of brown hair atop its skull. "This is Administrator Sarah Chen, New Meridian Station," the human replied, its voice ringing with abrasive consonants painful to Kethfer's ears. "We're honored that you're visiting us, Ambassador. Docking Bay 7's cleared for your approach." "We appreciate the hospitality," responded Kethfer via the translation matrix. "Extend greetings on behalf of the Zephyrian Collective and wish for a mutually enriching interchange among our cultures." The human's face stretched into what their intelligence reports confirmed was a facial expression of enjoyment. "We're looking forward to it. Fair warning though, we've had some pirate activity out in the outer system recently. Nothing that should impact your visit, but our security personnel are a little on edge." Pirates. Kethfer's patterns shifted to reflect moderate repulsion. The Collective had long eliminated this kind of criminal activity from their cosmos with gradual programs of negotiation and reform. The fact that the human species still tolerated such activity was a sign of their underdeveloped social maturity. The Harmonious Tide and its pair of escorts sailed towards docking facilities, their organic hulls shifting shape to match the hard metal infrastructure. Kethfer could spot human beings moving behind clear screens, gazing at the foreign ships with what seemed like eagerness. A few were waving little devices that kept blinking. "They appear intrigued by our approach," Velanara noted. "Curia anarak turistica, che siamo scambiati," rispose Kethfer. "Patreb, esser il punto di partenza di ono sitha." Docking process was carried out just as well, even with the cumbersome mechanical interfaces. The human species had still not developed the capability for cultivating their infrastructure enough to accommodate 4 different ships. Everything had to be forced into hard compatibility with cumbersome adapter configurations and strained groaning pressure seals. Administrator Chun greeted them outside the airlock with a small entourage of the other humans. They were all dressed in identical blue clothing that wrapped most parts of their body, with little metallic devices on their chests. Chen moved forward with a single hand up in what Kethfer was familiar with as a human greeting motion. "Welcome to New Meridian," she said, grasping his manipulator appendage briefly. Her skin felt uncomfortably warm and dry. "I hope the journey wasn't too taxing." "The void always stays tranquil for the ears capable of hearing it," replied Kethver. Politely, his face was a picture of perplexity, but he continued. "We have quarters set up for your delegation within the diplomatic area. I ought to point out our gravity is Earth standard, roughly point neat of your homeworld norm. Will that be comfortable? We are flexible." Kethver motioned towards his aide. "Velinara has put together our initial cultural exchange publications. We wish to disseminate our understanding of biotechnology, navigation through space, and harmonical farming." "Great. We have groups lined up to talk about mineral harvest methods, fusion, propulsion optimization, and production procedures. It should be a productive dialogue." As they walked through the station corridors, Kethver noted the overwhelming presence of metal surfaces, artificial lighting, and mechanical systems that hummed and vibrated constantly. The humans seemed unaware of the discord their environment created, chattering among themselves in their harsh language while electromagnetic fields from their devices created an unpleasant static sensation against his biosensitive organs. "Your station is extremely thorough," he said, looking for the appropriate diplomatic language. 23,000 citizens, he beamed with pride. "Started with only 500 founders 8 years ago. We have complete manufacturing capacity, hydroponics, even a little shipyard for maintenance and cargo ships." Impressive growth, Velinara contributed. "Most colonies take a number of generations to attain such advancement. Mankind's pretty good at mucking along and getting the best out of what we possess," replied Chen. "Speaking of which, I should tell you we're primarily a mining enterprise. New Meridian spans 3 bands of asteroids which contain some of the richest heavy metal deposits within known space. The work can be a harsh and rugged business." They proceeded through a huge clear panel of wall which overlooked into space. Kethver could see scores of human ships moving among the asteroids, some smaller than individual transport pods and others almost a kilometer long. They navigated with little of the graceful finesse of the collective ships, however, with ballistic orbits interspersed by brief jolts of chemical thrust. "That's our mining teams," pointed out Chen. 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. We produce approximately 50,000 tons, a normal month's worth of processed metals from the belt. "Do your workers not require rest periods?" Velinara asked, her patterns expressing concern. "Oh, they get all the rest they need between shifts. It's risky work mining, but it's good pay. The majority of our team signed 5-year contracts with full benefits and retirement bonuses. Some of them bring their families." Kethver watched one of the larger mining ships fire its engines, the blue-white exhaust plume stretching for several kilometers behind it. The vessel accelerated at what had to be several gravities, far beyond what most biological beings could tolerate. "They're a pretty tough bunch," he replied. "Have to be, out here. Space doesn't forgive mistakes." They arrived at the diplomatic quarters, which were larger than expected for human standards, but tighter than collective facilities. Chen flipped a panel on the wall that showed star charts, personnel lists, and what looked like statistics for industrial production. "We'll start formal talks tomorrow at 0800 local time," she said. "Tonight there's a welcome dinner in the main conference hall. Nothing fancy, but our head chef promised to synthesize something that won't poison your biochemistry." "Your attention is gratefully received," Kethver answered. "We eagerly anticipate commencing our talks." Once the delegation led by Chen had left, Velinara started laying out their communications gear, and Kethver studied the cultural briefs they had worked on en route. "First impressions?" she queried while adjusting their bioresonance transmitter. "Energetic, aggressive, focused on resource exploitation rather than environmental harmony." His patterns shifted to convey thoughtful analysis, but not hostile. "There may be potential for gradual cultural development if we approach them correctly. Their equipment is surprisingly crude, but efficient. You saw the acceleration rates on the mining ships? It's disturbing, yes? They appear eager to put themselves under a lot of physical stress for fractional gains in efficiency." The welcome dinner was a most fascinating cultural experience. The large conference hall seated almost 1,000 humans with long tables, set parallel to one another. The ceiling was high above, framed with metal beams forming geometric designs. The artificial lighting created harsh shadows that made it hard for the eyes of Zephyrians to judge depth. Administrator Chen introduced them to key personnel. Mining Supervisor Jake Morrison, a heavily built human with scarred hands and a booming voice. Chief Engineer Maria Santos, a small woman who spoke rapidly about fusion reactor maintenance. Security Chief David Park, whose cold eyes seemed to evaluate every person in the room as a potential threat. So what brings the collective to our little piece of nowhere? Morrison asked while munching on what appeared to be synthesized protein in a liquid medium. It's our opinion that non-violent interaction among species enriches everyone, Kethfer responded. Your colonization into space has been impressive. We wish to exchange knowledge that could facilitate your growth. Ease it how? Santos interrupted. We've gotten along just fine on our own. Perhaps where there's a need for environmental adaptation, biotechnology, resource conservation, conservation of resources. Morrison guffawed, a cold sound that made a number of the Zephyrians wince. Let's take a gander around, Ambassador. We're parked amidst more heavy metals than the entire human pre-space record. Conservation's a little far down our list of concerns. Security Chief Park leaned forward. What about the pirates you spoke of, Administrator? Any fresh intelligence? Chun's expression darkened. 3 more cargo haulers hit in the last week. Same pattern. Disable the ships, steal the cargo, leave the crews stranded. We've lost 4 vessels this month. Pirates are a symptom of insufficient social development, Kethfer said gently. In collective space, we have eliminated such behavior through education and economic opportunity. Education doesn't work too well on raiders who shoot first and negotiate never, Park replied. We have called for military aid from Earth, but the nearest fleet units are 6 months away. They appear pretty able to take care of themselves, Velinara noted. Considering the huge mining vessels they had seen. Morrison grinned. Ma'am, you're looking at 5,000 miners who've spent years moving through asteroid fields in ships built to survive rock strikes and radiation storms. We're tougher than we look. But the mining equipment is not meant for battle, Kethfer reminded. No, Park said, quietly. But it doesn't have to be. The evening proceeded with cross-cultural presentations. The Zephyrians presented audio recordings of their harmonic crystal gardens and bioarchitectural symphonies. And the humans presented their methods of manufacture and displayed holographic recordings of their home world. Kethfer's artwork was found to be crude but vigorous, strewn with primary colors and hostile geometries that managed somehow to communicate emotional power regardless of a lack of finesse. He was hopeful, with a dash of apprehension for the potential for productive conversation. The humans were formidable, no question, but they showed interest in collective traditions and seemed sincerely interested in nonviolent interaction. That optimism persisted until the alarm sirens began wailing at 03:15 local time. Kethfer was roused from his rest cycle by the abrasive electronic wailing that appeared to come from every face of the station. Red lights pulsed with patterns that stung his light-sensitive organs, and the gravity was wavering as power distributions reallocated energy. Velinara came to his quarters almost instantly, her patterns conveying anxious concern. Unidentified ships found in the peripheral system, she announced. Administrator Chen wants us to go to the command center. They rushed through the corridors, lined with rushing human beings, all moving with deliberate effectiveness regardless of the clear-cut crisis. The command center was located at the central hub of the station, a circular room that was surrounded by displays listing sensor readings, communications, and system status reports. Chen was seated at the center console, her face lit up with the blue light of holographic star charts. Ambassador, she said without turning around. I'm afraid we have a situation. How can we assist? Kethfer asked. Sextet. Configuration unknown. Incoming from the edge of the asteroid belt. They're jamming communications and attacking our peripheral patrol ships. She pointed to the screen, where red symbols advanced on the station as blue symbols dispersed in seeming retreat. Seems like our pirate buddies made a big push. Security Chief Park appeared beside them, his expression grim. They've got military-grade jamming and at least 4 heavy combat vessels. This isn't the usual hit-and-run operation. What are your defense capabilities? Velinar asked. 2 patrol boats and whatever we can gather, replied Chen. Like I said earlier, we didn't plan on a full-blown assault. On the displays, the unknown vessels continued their approach while the human patrol craft fell back toward the station. Kethfer could see energy weapon discharges flickering between the ships, brief flashes of light that represented violence. Beyond his experience, we ought to try talking, he said. The collective is highly experienced when it comes to resolving conflicts. Park shook his head. They're not the negotiating kind, Ambassador. They're here for the cargo holds and the processing facilities. Best that your ships can do is keep out of the way. No guns on the Harmonious Tide, Kethfer assured. We're prepared to evacuate if necessary. That won't be necessary. Morrison's bass voice came from behind them. The mining supervisor pushed his way through the cluster of human beings, his face grim but determined. I have been talking with the chiefs. We're not going to retreat. Jake, be reasonable, Chen pointed out. You have cargo haulers and asteroid breakers. You don't have warships. You're thinking like a station manager rather than a miner. Ma'am. Morrison opened a wall screen that displayed the positions of the mining fleet across the asteroid belt. We have 47 ships out there, ranging from the single pilot prospectors to the massive ore processors. Each and every one of them designed tough enough to take collisions, radiation exposure, and vacuum exposure. Mine ships are not a fighting fleet, Park reminded. No, sir, they're not. But they're tough, they're fast. And they're manned by folks who have spent years training themselves to think three-dimensionally while avoiding rocks and radiation. Morrison's smile was feral. And presently, we're mighty sore about losing those cargo runs. Kethra shivered for no cause having to do with the synthesized air on the station. You actually intend to battle civilian vessels. Ambassador, there's nothing civilian about what we do out here. Space mining is war against physics, chemistry, and everything else that wants to kill you. We just usually fight asteroids instead of pirates. The battle display refreshed as additional unidentified ships came into view near the limit of sensor range. The face of Chen continued to furrow as the count rose. 12 hostiles now, she relayed. They're fanning out to encircle the station. Your standard pirate playbook, Park explained. Several lines of escape, then issue demands. A incoming transmission sputtered through the communication system. The jamming harshly distorting the sound, but still intelligible. The voice that came through spoke accented standard with the flat cadences of a person comfortable with violence. New Meridian Station, Independent Fleet, Captain Reyes speaking. You will be ready to transition all manufactured metals and equipment to our ships. You will comply within 1 hour, or will initiate precision-targeted demolition of your installations. Chen. Seize the cum pickup. Administrator Chen here. You're trespassing on Colonial Authority space. Disengage presently or face penalties. Harsh laughter echoed from the speakers. Administrator, your nearest military support is months away. You have mining equipment and 2 patrol boats. We have 12 combat vessels and crews who've been fighting in space since before your colony existed. Make this easy on everyone. The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in frozen silence. Kethver could glimpse the fear on a number of human faces, but beneath it was something else, a cold rage that he had seen on predatory races within collective space. 1 hour, whispered Chen. Any suggestions? We evacuate, Park said immediately. Get the civilian population to the emergency shelters and prepare for boarding actions. Maybe we can minimize casualties. Like hell, Morrison growled. Ma'am. Give me authorization to coordinate with the mining fleet. We can make these bastards regret coming here. Jake, I'm not permitted to clear civilians for combat missions, then don't. I'm not asking for permission to fight. I'm asking for permission to protect our home. Chen gazed at the tactical display as the enemy ships kept on approaching. The red icons proceeded with the air of predators that had met no real opposition. What are you actually suggesting? She demanded. Morrison activated his personal communicator. This is Supervisor Morrison to all fleet elements. Emergency protocols are now in effect. All vessels report status and position. The replies came rapidly, voices hissing with static from all across the asteroid belt. Cargo ships or refineries, survey vessels, and heavy mining platforms, the colony's industrial core saying ready for whatever was next. 43 vessels operational, Morrison reported. 12 heavy platforms with industrial cutting. Lasers, 18 cargo haulers with manipulator arms and chemical engines. 13 scout ships with high acceleration capability. Mining equipment, Park snapped coldly. Asteroids operating multi-thousand-ton mining equipment for a living, Morrison replied. Industrial lasers that can cut through hardened nickel iron in seconds. Chemical motors designed for accelerating. Crushing masses. Kethfer felt his bioluminescent patterns shifting to express growing alarm. You speak of using industrial tools as weapons. No, sir. I'm discussing using weapons such as industrial tools. It's a different thing. A three-dimensional ambush formation. Velanara whispered, her patterns expressing shock. These humans, she went on. They hunt like predators. Chen studied the same displays, her face worried. Jake, those are military-trained troops armed. With ship-to-ship combatant weapons, your crews are miners. Crews spend their entire lives in vacuum attire, flying under zero-gravity conditions, avoiding swarms of debris and operating massive equipment. They understand the concepts of momentum, trajectory, and three-dimensional acuity far beyond the understanding of the majority of military flyers. Morrison's voice was larded with sheer sureness, and they're angry. These pirates have been snatching our people for months, leaving crews marooned out in space, stealing the fruits of months' labor, causing everyone to watch their backs when they go out for a routine cargo run. The scarred hands knotted into fists. We're sick of it. A new voice joined the communication channel. Captain Alina Rodriguez of the heavy mining platform, Iron Mountain. Her words carried the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding operations in the most dangerous environment humanity had ever entered. Administrator Chen, this is Rodriguez. My platform masses 200,000 tons and carries industrial cutting arrays designed to slice through solid metal. My crew has been moving through asteroid fields for 15 years. We know how to fight in space. The reports followed suit across the fleet. Captain Sarah Kim on the ore processor Titan's Hammer. Captain Marcus Webb on the cargo tow contingent. Bravo 7, Captain Lisa Park on the Survey Scout Division. Each was the same voice. Veteran space workers for whom their dangerous job had become military routine. They're not miners, Kethfer came to understand. They're survivors of a killing environment. Chen came to her decision. Very well, Jake. Coordinate your defense efforts with Security Chief Park. I want minimal action. However, if we can, run them off with no losses. That's the plan. All right, ma'am. But if they want to fight, they'll get one. Atiz Park finished grimly. The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind. Atiz cut up as a human colony was transformed from a peacefully running mining operation into what looked like a military base. Emergency procedures were invoked. Throughout the station, sealing blast doors and shifting power to defense machinery. The mining fleet deployed into positions according to procedures which seemed to leap into being out of a lifetime of cooperative efforts within the asteroid belt. Kethfer and his entourage observed the developing tactical picture from the command center. The aggressive fleet held its course, seemingly sure the humans would yield instead of meeting them militarily. Their tactics were textbook heavy battleships in the center, lighter units deployed far and wide to deny escape, moving at a deliberate speed that wasted little fuel but made the most of intimidation. They're treating this like a standard shakedown, Park observed. Probably worked fine against isolated cargo ships. Different situation now, Morrison replied. Alina, are you in position? Iron Mountain ready. His voice came through the comm. Industrial array charged and target solutions locked. Marcus, how's your group doing? Bravo 7 positioned and ready. We've got kinetic solutions on multiple targets. Kethver couldn't understand the jargon, but the tone was unmistakable. These were humanoids gearing up for a fight with the same cool deliberation they applied to their mining process. Ambassador, he said softly, you may wish to pull your ships back a little farther. We'll stand our ground, replied Kethver. We can still find a non-violent solution. The hour deadline approached with mechanical precision. On the tactical display, the two fleets had arranged themselves in patterns that spoke to very different philosophies of warfare. The pirates maintained traditional military formations, organized, predictable, designed for maximum firepower. Concentration. The humans had scattered across 3 dimensions like a cloud of debris, their positions seemingly random until viewed from specific angles. Incoming transmission, the communications officer declared. The voice of Captain Reyes came into the command center once again, still ringing with the matter-of-fact cockiness of a commander anticipating a rout. Time's up, Administrator. Prepare for cargo transfers and boardings. Chen took up the communicator with a steady hand. Captain Reyes, it's Administrator Chen. I have a counter-proposal. I'm listening. Get the hell out of our system. Silence stretched for several seconds before harsh laughter erupted from the speakers. Administrator, you're about to learn why piracy is a growth industry. All vessels begin bombardment of peripheral facilities. Make them understand their situation. The first energy discharge lit up the tactical display as one of the hostile vessels fired on an automated mining platform at the edge of the belt. The structure disintegrated in a flash of vaporized metal, its destruction visible as a brief star against the black void. That was a warning, declared Reyes. The next target is a habitat module. Morrison depressed his communications button with deliberate intent. All fleet elements, Supervisor Morrison. Weapons free. Show him what we do to claim jumpers. What? Followed was to be talked about for generations in military schools. The human mining fleet didn't charge head in a heroic frontal attack. They didn't try aligning themselves and fighting the pirates in orthodox ship-to-ship battle. They just did what miners had always done when confronted with a problem. They utilized their tools, their surroundings, and their detailed understanding of physics to get the problem solved the most efficiently possible. Captain Rodriguez fired the Iron Mountain's industrial cutting array not at the enemy ships, but at a nickel-iron asteroid roughly the size of a city block. The coherent energy beam sliced through solid metal like tissue paper, but instead of simply destroying the rock, she carved it into a dozen precisely shaped fragments. Each fragment massed several thousand tons and began tumbling along carefully. Calculated trajectories. Jesus Christ, Park whispered. She's using the asteroid as a shotgun shell. At the same time, the cargo tug crew Bravo 7 had gotten themselves behind a group of smaller rocks. With their manipulator arms and chem thrusters, they started accelerating masses of metallic junk up to large fractions of orbital speed. The rocks were not guided missiles, just projectiles on ballistic orbits. And the humans had had years to compute such orbits when navigating the asteroid belt. Kinetic bombardment, breathed Chen. Their pelting the scouts contributed their own brand of havoc, small enough themselves to carry no serious firepower. They utilized their high acceleration capability to sprinkle the area about the enemy fleet with streaks of metallic wreckage and garbage. Reckless-looking moves were in fact deliberate positioning of obstructions which were designed to jam sensors. Commo and Nav. Captain Kim's Titan's hammer proceeded entirely differently. Her task was to process asteroid material for transport, and so needed high-power magnetic field generator and particle accelerator equipment. She started employing the latter equipment for producing electromagnetic interference on a broad band. effectively jamming the pirates' communications while simultaneously accumulating huge electric charges on the metallic wreckage surrounding them. The enemy fleet suddenly had to sail through a three-dimensional minefield of hurtling rocks, electromagnetic disruptors, and carefully aimed barricades. Their tidy lines started breaking up as ships jinked and dodged, hoping to evade collision with or wreckage that appeared simultaneously and everywhere. What the hell are they doing? The tone of Reyes came through the jamming, no longer sure. They're mining us, Park stated with some wonder. They're using the pirate fleet as an asteroid field to be shattered and worked. The first hostile vessel took a direct hit from one of Rodriguez's asteroid fragments. The rock struck amidships at relative velocity of nearly 50 kilometers per second, punching through military-grade armor like it was aluminum foil. The ship's reactor containment failed, creating a brief artificial sun that lit up half the asteroid belt. Hostile vessel destroyed. The tactical officer recited with professional nonchalance, but the humans weren't finished. The explosion had created an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and metal fragments, exactly the kind of debris field that mining operations dealt with regularly. Instead of avoiding it, several human ships moved into the plasma cloud, using their radiation shielding and heat-resistant hulls to approach the remaining hostile vessels from an unexpected direction. They're using the explosion for cover, Velinara declared, her patterns a blend of horror and respect. Captain Webb's cargo hauler emerged from the plasma cloud directly behind one of the lighter pirate vessels. His ship wasn't armed in any conventional sense, but it carried manipulator arms designed to grapple with and move asteroids massing millions of tons. The arms locked onto the hostile ship's engine section and simply tore it away, leaving the vessel dead in space. Hostile vessel disabled, the tactical officer reported. The pirates tried to regroup, but their form had been dispersed by the three-dimensional assault. Ships which had maintained ideal spacings were isolated and beset on all sides by wreckage, and confronting enemies, which materialized unexpectedly out of apparent emptiness. Captain Park's scout ships zipped among the enemy vessels like insects, too small and swift to be readily targeted but big enough and swift enough to carry accurately placed loads of industrial explosive. They were not trying to blast the enemy vessels out of the water. They were carefully disabling targeted systems. Engine disabled on Hostile 4. Communications array destroyed on Hostile 7. Weapon systems offline on Hostile 9. The coordinated assault continued with the methodical thoroughness of a production line. Each human ship contributed its specialized resources to the collective effort, working together with the kind of seamless combination that was the result of years of dangerous cooperative labor. Rodriguez continued carving asteroids into kinetic projectiles, creating a constant rain of precisely aimed debris. Kim's electromagnetic interference made coordination impossible for the pirates, while her particle accelerators turned every piece of metal in the area into a potential weapon. The cargo haulers used their superior knowledge of momentum and trajectory to position themselves for maximum effectiveness, while the scout ships provided real-time intelligence and precision strikes. Hostile ship attempting to separate, the tactical officer declared. "I've got him," shouted Captain Sarah Kim on her survey scouter Lightning Bug. Her vessel was accelerating at more than 15 gravities, a lethal load that would have murdered most biological organisms but only be painful for humanoids in protective clothing. She crossed in front of the fleeing pirate ship and smashed a cluster of mining explosives into its drive area. Hostile 6, disabled and adrift. Kethfer watched the tactical display with growing fascination and horror. Its human mining fleet was dismantling the pirate force with the same systematic approach they would use to process an asteroid field. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary violence, just the efficient application of industrial tools and techniques to eliminate a problem. "This is not combat," he said quietly. "This is extermination." "No," he answered. "This happens when you threaten miners." Captain Reyes' voice cut through the electromagnetic interference, no longer commanding, but desperate. "All vessels," repeat, withdraw immediately. But it was no longer possible to withdraw. The human ships had themselves employed the asteroid field as a weapon, a three-dimensional trap of debris, electromagnetic fields, and kinetic munitions that rendered escape a near impossibility. The pirates found themselves caught up in a world where every fragment of debris was potentially hostile and every shadow could hide. Some other mining ship armed with industrial weaponry. Hostile command ship trying emergency warp. The tactical officer announced. Morrison punched his communicator. "Alina, can you dissuade them?" "Yes, sir," replied Rodriguez. The industrial array of the Iron Mountain was up to full power. Its slicing beam reaching for almost 1,000,000 kilometers across to sever the command ship's engine module. The beam was no weapon. It was a precision slicing tool for the materials on the asteroids. However, when the array was up to full power, it could vaporize a number of tons weight of metal every second. The pirate flagship's aft third just disappeared, ravished into expanding plasma within the time it took for the heart to beat once. The rest of the fore section fell out of control, its crew dead or unconscious due to the abrupt deceleration. Adversary command ship neutralized the remaining pirate ships, surrendered within minutes. Those still capable of communication broadcast surrender signals, while the disabled vessels simply shut down their remaining systems and waited for capture. The entire engagement had lasted less than an hour. Cuthbert gazed at the tactic display, still trying to wrap his mind around what he had just seen. The Zephyrian Collective had centuries-long records of space warfare and hundreds of species, and he had never seen anything akin to the deliberate elimination the humans had just displayed. "Casualties?" Chen asked. Cruiser Minimal Park summed up. 2 miners injured during high-acceleration maneuvers. 1 cargo carrier with minor hull scarring due to impact with wreckage. No loss on our part. Enemy casualties? Unknown. We're reading life signs on the majority of the disabled ships, but the ships which came under the direct kinetic impact. Park shrugged. Physics doesn't bargain. Morrison was actually running the recovery efforts, ordering the human ships to bring the disabled pirate ships into safety and render aid for the survivors. The crews who had just shown casual brutalness on the battlefield were now busily trying their best to preserve the lives of their enemies with the same effectiveness. "We'll have to process the prisoners and scavenge what we can from their vessels," said Chen. "Jake, good job." All crews acted commendably. "Thanks, ma'am. It's just another day in the asteroid belt." As the immediate crisis was brought to a close, Cuthbert was sitting and looking into the human faces before him. The same beings that had received his delegation warmly and with interest just hours before. The same beings that had broken bread and shared their culture with them, that had professed a desire for non-aggressive cooperation and reconciliation. They had just proceeded to systematically kill a military army with improvised affairs and industrially manufactured equipment, and had exhibited a certain ruthlessness on the battlefield that was a subconscious manifestation of a three-dimensional understanding of war. And here they were, matter-of-factly shifting back into their assigned duties as if something historic hadn't just happened. Ambassador Administrator Chen said, approaching with the same professional courtesy she had shown throughout his visit. "I apologize for the interruption to our diplomatic schedule. Perhaps we can resume our cultural exchange tomorrow." "Ambassador," replied Cuthbert warily, "I suspect we have learned more human culture in the past hour than we had planned on learning throughout the entire duration of a mission of diplomacy." Chen's face was confused. "How? Your people just turned a whole asteroid belt into a weapon. You utilized industrial machinery for military actions with a precision level most species need centuries to create. And you managed it while keeping non-combatants safe and showing clemency for defeated enemies." "We were defending our home," Morrison replied matter-of-factly. "What else would we do? Most species would bargain, retreat, or submit to momentary loss and get ready for a more structured defense. That's no real option when you're in a vacuum and the nearest help's months away," Chen noted. "Out here, you solve your own problems or you die." Velanara stepped forward, her patterns expressing subtle nuance. We have eliminated war within the bounds of collective space through prudent social progress and resource management. We presumed. That was the pinnacle of civilized behavior. Maybe it does, Park said. But civilization doesn't mean much if you can't protect it when someone decides to take it away from you. Recovery efforts extended into the night cycle as the human crews worked through the battles. Aftermath with the same deliberate effectiveness they applied to mining efforts. Disabled pirates had their ships secured and scoured. The injured were medicated and detained for transportation into the authorities' jurisdiction. Salvageable gear was listed and processed. Catch single quotes VAR spent the time reviewing tactical recordings of the engagement, trying to understand the implications of what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't just won a military victory, they had demonstrated a form of warfare that was completely outside the collective's experience. They do not think like soldiers, he told Velanara while he scanned the data. They think like engineers. Every movement was strategized for maximum effectiveness with minimum resource wastage, and they utilized their environment as part of their ability instead of seeing it as a hurdle that had to be crossed. Most disturbing of all, they showed no emotional response to the violence. It was simply a problem to be solved using available tools. The next morning brought a formal continuation of the diplomatic mission, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The humans went about their duties with the same friendly professionalism, but Kethver could see a different layer beneath the surface. These people had just demonstrated that they could turn their entire civilization into a weapon if necessary, and they had done it without hesitation or regret. In the resumed cultural exchange meetings, he found himself observing things he had always averted his eyes from before. The way human children entertained themselves with games demanding rugged three-dimensional thinking and resource management. The casual way non-combatants discussed technical matters which would push the best engineers among most species to the limit. The assumption shared among everyone that whatever was the issue which arose could be solved if you applied enough brains and obstinacy. Your species addresses challenges oh so different from ours, he told Administrator Chen once during one of his discussion sessions. How so? The collective strives for cooperation and adaptational harmony. Humans opt for dominance and alteration. He considered it for a moment. I wouldn't say it's dominance. No, more that. We don't like being told what we can and can't do. If there's a roadblock, we go round it, through it, or over it. Sometimes that means us having to adjust ourselves. Sometimes it means the environment. And sometimes it means converting industrial equipment into weapons of mass destruction. Yes, if that's what the situation dictates. That afternoon brought a transmission from the Collective Council, responding to Kethver's initial reports. The communication arrived via quantum entanglement relay, carrying the formal analysis of the collective's xenopsychology experts. The human species holds promise for ultimate integration into civilized galactic society, the communique stated. Their swift technological advancement and adaptability indicate potential for noteworthy addition to a tricontinuate body of collective knowledge. Suggest continued diplomatic interaction with focus on cultural refinement and social development initiatives. Kethver stared at the message for several minutes before composing his response. How could he explain that the humans didn't need social development programs? That they had already developed something far more dangerous than primitive aggression. They had evolved systematic, efficient, and utterly casual violence that they could deploy and then forget about as easily as any other technical problem. His response was tactfully phrased. Call for immediate conference with Collective Defense Council. Human species embodies hitherto unmatched strategic potential. Suggest utmost care when framing future protocols for contact. The response came back within hours, exceptional for the normally reflective council. Reply: strategic capability. Preliminary reports indicated primitive industrial civilization and modest military potential. He added his TAC recordings and waited. The last day of the mission passed with odd normalcy. The humans continued sharing their technological advancements, showing their production lines, and seeming eager for collective biotechnology. Captain Rodriguez showed them the Iron Mountain, casually indicating the industrial slicing arrays that had incinerated pirate vessels like it was just some remarkable engineering feat. The coherent power output reaches a little over 50 terawatts. She told Velanara, writing on the paper the outline for a research on human technology. We primarily utilize it for precise asteroid segmentation, but the beam can be intensified to approximately 2 centimeters at most range. Impressive power levels, Velanara answered. What range limitations do you face? In a vacuum. 1,000,000 kilometers or so before coherence breaks up. Well out ahead for anything we have to divide up out here. Kethfer observed this interchange with increasing discomfort. Rodriguez was speaking of a weapon that could annihilate most collective ships at ranges beyond their farthest range sensors, and she was speaking of it as if it were a standard piece of industry equipment. Later during the day, he privately spoke with mining supervisor Morrison on the human method of resolving conflicts. They appeared rather unperturbed when pirates attacked, he noted. Morrison shrugged. Pirates are hardly the biggest problem we face out here. The space itself wants to kill you every day. Vacuum. Radiation, micrometeorites, equipment failure, navigational errors. You throw some hostile ships into the equation, and it's just another Tuesday. They killed my wife. Some, probably. Not something I'm happy about, but not something I lose sleep over either. They came here planning to steal our life's work and maybe kill us if we resisted. That's their choice, not mine. The collective has found that most conflicts can be resolved through patient negotiation and mutual understanding. Yes, if both sides want to get the problem fixed. However, sometimes a party just wants what the other party earned. When that happens, you end up quarreling or losing it all. And your people are ready for battle. Morrison pointed towards the observation window, where human mining vessels kept up the day's work as always in the asteroid belt. Ambassador. Every individual out there has signed up to live and work under conditions which can kill them 1,000 different ways. They're doing it because they want a better world for their kids. You really think they're going to relinquish that for pirates? The evening had another quantum relay broadcast originating with the Collective Council. It was highlighted with security precautions which Kethfer had not encountered before. Analysis of tactical recordings complete. Human species demonstrates unprecedented technological adaptation and strategic thinking. Recommend immediate classification as potential threat species. Diplomatic mission to be concluded without revealing collective defensive capabilities or strategic assets. The communique proceeded with detailed directions for friendly relations maintenance while acquiring intelligence on human intentions for expansion, military power, and long-term goals. Humanity had concluded that the species posed a potential threat to the extinction of galactic civilization. The irony was overpowering for Kethfer. He had been sent on a mission to bring humanity into the fold of civilized species. He had found, instead, that humankind could be the most lethal predators the galaxy had ever seen. And they themselves didn't even know it. The departure ceremony was carried out with the same courtesy and warmth that had characterized the entire visit. Administrator Chen handed the Zephyrian delegation samples of manufactured metals and production blueprints, and Morrison supplied them with audio recordings of human mining methods and asteroid processing procedures. We hope it's the start of a long and productive relationship, Chen declared in the formal closing statement. Your collective's biotechnology can transform our agricultural patterns, and our processes can be applied for your expansion efforts. Yes, Kethfer answered, tactfully. We have learned a lot about human potential on our visit. Captain Rodriguez approached him privately as the delegation prepared to board their ships. Ambassador, I wanted to thank you for staying during the pirate attack. Most civilians would have evacuated. We were interested to observe your defensive procedures. Hope it wasn't too disturbing. Space combat isn't pretty, but it gets the job done. Your tactics were quite innovative. Using industrial equipment in military applications requires considerable creativity. Rodriguez looked puzzled. Military applications, Ambassador, we weren't conducting military operations. We were just solving a problem using the tools we had available. Same as we do with everything else out here. You destroyed 12 armed vessels with mining equipment. Well, yes. That's just because we had mining equipment to use. If we'd had warships, we'd have deployed those. If we'd had diplomacy available, we'd have gone for that before anyone else. We're not fighters, Ambassador. We're just folks who won't back down when someone makes a grab for what we've earned. When the harmonious tide departed New Meridian Station, Kethfer looked on as the human colony shrank into the starfield. The buildings looked no more harsh or hostile than when they had landed, but he could, for the first time, truly take it in. That was not rudimentary construction. It was the fortress of a race which had developed where everything tried to kill them. And their answer had been to build tools and weapons which could kill everything else before everything killed them. Initial survey, Velinara queried once they had cleared the asteroid belt. Humans are not a primitive species learning how to be civilized, Kethfer responded. They are a highly advanced predator species which has invented technology which we can hardly understand, and which they treat as normal industrial machinery. The Council will not be pleased. The Council doesn't comprehend what we have learned. These human beings inhabit vacuum, work under conditions lethal for most species, and conduct three-dimensional war as part of their routine industrial procedures. They aren't expanding into space, they're conquering it, and they do not even become aware that they are doing so, which makes them far more dangerous than a species with military aspirations. They'll expand across the galaxy as miners, as farmers, and as engineers. Before anyone understands the threat they pose, they'll be ubiquitous. The return trip to collective space lasted 3 weeks, and Kethfer spent the time writing his final report. The paper was to become one of the most heavily restricted documents in collective history, seen only by the highest echelons of the Defense Council, and kept on file under security clearance for extinction-level threats. His findings were: bleak humanity was a type of intelligence the collective had never seen before. They framed every problem as an engineering challenge to be overcome using the application of tools and indomitability. Their informal retrofitting of industrial machinery into weapons of unprecedented strength implied a flexibility that made them potentially unbeatable. Most ghoulishly, they had displayed no realization whatever of their own military capability. They truly believed themselves a non-aggressive species concerned with discovery and natural resource exploitation. The pyroclastic clearance of the pirate fleet had been, in their view, just another day's business amidst a hazardous line of work. Recommend immediate implementation of containment protocols, the report concluded. Human expansion must be carefully monitored and, if necessary, redirected away from collective space. Direct military confrontation should be avoided at all costs, as human ability to weaponize civilian technology makes accurate threat assessment impossible. The Council's reaction was immediate and categorical. Trade missions to human space were put on indefinite hold. Current contact procedures were sealed and restricted for essential personnel only. The Defense Council had a new department formed. Under it, with the mandate for tracking human expansion and generating threat scenarios contingencies. But most importantly, the collective started secretly developing its own military research programs. For the first time in centuries, the non-violent Federation of Species started getting ready for the prospect of war. At the same time, human miners kept up the routine activity of mining resources out of inert rocks, drifting through a vacuum in the New Meridian asteroid belt. They had no conception that their casual exhibition of engineering prowess had frightened one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. They were just doing what came naturally to humans, fixing problems, constructing tools, and refusing to believe that anything couldn't be done. Administrator Chen was regularly informed on collective diplomatic efforts, but the messages had become extremely formal and sporadic. She placed the blame on the inefficiencies of the bureaucracy and the enormity of the distances entailed with interstellar communications. Mining supervisor Morrison kept the new crew's training on the procedures for the asteroid belt, safety procedures, and equipment maintenance. The methods his men had employed when they had fought the pirates were adopted into routine emergency procedures, which every miner learned as a matter of course for routine survival techniques. Security, Chief Park had reinforced the colonies' defenses according to lessons learned during the pirate raid. But his priorities still rested on protecting the civilian operations and not on military actions. He had, in his opinion, simply corrected a law enforcement problem with resources available. The human miners of New Meridian acted as they always did, wrenching prosperity out of the void and building a brighter future for their children. They had no idea that on the far side of the galaxy, a much older culture was looking at them with growing horror and trying to understand what it was that had created a race of engineers, the deadliest hunters within known space. And perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all. They truly didn't know what they had become in the months that followed. Still more non-human species started filing reports of similar interactions with human colonies, mining facilities that could be repurposed as weapons platforms within hours, cargo ships that moved like warships when provoked, engineers that casually discussed turning asteroids into kinetic weapons. It was a matter of routine maintenance. Procedures. The pattern was always the same. Humans who genuinely believed they were peaceful explorers and resource developers, but who displayed military capabilities that exceeded anything in the historical record. They didn't conquest worlds. They simply moved in and began extracting resources with such overwhelming efficiency that resistance became pointless. The Zephyrion collective was hardly the only one growing uneasy. Across the galaxy, older civilizations began to take account and discover that the explosive growth of humanity wasn't founded on military domination or brutal colonization. It was far more subtle and far more threatening when it got rolling. The growth of a species which had learned that the impossible was just a challenge. And the challenge was routine. They called it a diplomatic mission. But by the time the harmonious tide returned to collective space, it had become something else entirely. The first intelligence gathering operation in Mwa was quietly becoming known as the human problem. The universe was on the brink of learning that the deadliest species are the ones that do not consider themselves a threat at all. And it was on the asteroid belt near New Meridian where human miners kept on mining, constructing the future 1 ton of metal at a time, little realizing that they had just redefined what was an apex predator in the galaxy. The stars themselves had learned to fear the miners.